All right. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the August 7th, 2018 Council Committee meeting. My name is Stephanie Meyer, Vice Chair and a council member from Ward 3, and I will be chairing the meeting tonight. Council President Zimmerman is absent. Besides myself, the committee members here tonight are Jim Neighbor, Ward 1, Eric Jenkins, Ward 2, Justin Adrian, Ward 3, Mickey Sandifer, Ward 4, and Lindsay Constance, Ward 4. Before we begin our agenda, I'd like to explain our procedures for public input. During the meeting, I will offer the opportunity for public input. If you would like to speak to the committee at any of those times, please go to the podium. I will ask that you state your name and address for the record, then you may offer your comments. So that members of the audience can hear your comments, I would ask that you speak directly into the microphone. By policy, comments are limited to 5 minutes, and after you're finished, please sign the form on the podium to ensure we have an accurate record of your name and address. And I would like the record to reflect that Council Member Mike Kemling from Ward 2 is here now. So welcome. All right, there are 2 items on tonight's agenda. The first is the Shawnee Recreation Center Master Plan and Feasibility Study presentation. The city signed an agreement with Perkins & Will, formerly Sink Homes Death Lifts, in January 2018 to conduct a Recreation Center Master Plan and Feasibility Study. The team will present an overview of the findings to date. Following the presentation, staff would ask that the council committee provide direction regarding program options, partnership opportunities with DeSoto USD 232 School District for the aquatic component, continuation of the relationship with the design team, construction method and development of the RFQ, and public input through a ballot question. Neil Holman, Parks and Rec Director, will introduce the team and they will present additional information. Welcome, Neil.
Hello, good evening, and thank you so much for allowing us to present tonight. Thanks again for last Friday for the council. I thought the meeting went real well. So thank you very much for your time. Thought there was a lot of good questions. A lot of good information was presented. I know it's for long 2 hours. So, but again, thank you. Staff did take all the questions that were thrown out. And we have put those in the presentation. So, and if something spurs another question, please ask. We've got representatives from Chris is here from Perkins Will and Darren from Ballard King. So one question that we will probably come back on, and it was the mayor's question of the mill levy. Two reasons. One, that we'll come back and answer it. One is that, like the other cities, we are going through a budget process as well. So mill levies aren't set right now. And then 2, we would like to have that opportunity to at least have talks with the school district and see where that lies within that. So now I'd like to have Chris come up. It's probably going to be a tag team with Chris and with Perkins Will and Darren with Ballard King. So.
Well, good evening. Again, I'm Chris Kostelik with Perkins & Will Architects, and I will go through this and do my best to try to breeze through again. Lots of charts and graphs, lots of data, but maybe at the end of each chapter we'll stop, talk about some of the questions, and then we'll continue moving forward. But I'll do my best to try to keep this moving along. So we are going to talk a bit about the background, some of the things we've done relative to public outreach and gathering information through the last several months, basically since January. We will talk a little bit about the survey, both the statistically valid random survey as well as some of the feedback from the non-random survey. We will go through, Darren will go through a market analysis, and then we'll finish up by talking about some building concepts, what it may cost to operate those particular concepts, and then we'll talk about some conclusions and next steps. So I think the background will kind of get you up to speed where we've been with the community up until this point. Starting in January, sort of began the process of planning this master plan. At that point, we engaged the steering committee, began doing some stakeholder outreach. Many folks, both from council as well as from other community organizations, participated in that and gave us feedback and really helped sort of guide the process. From that point, we crafted the public survey, held 2 open houses houses, one sort of in the more central district, one sort of in the western ward, and we're able to get a lot of feedback from the community, and we'll sort of show you some of the feedback from that, and then ultimately use this to craft some diagrams, plans, and a potential or proposed facility program that would essentially tell us what's in this building. And so I think that really set us off on the right foot. So that was the timeline I just went through, beginning in January, and here we are in August with sort of a draft report to react to. And again, hopefully, as Neil said, we've answered some of the questions that came about on Friday relative to that big report that was dropped into your packet. And so we did conduct this Build-A-Center exercise during both the open houses, and also made that available to some folks within the Recreation Center. And from that, we basically gave people a list of amenities, potential amenities, and some relative costs. So the idea being that not only do we talk about expectations and needs, but we have to sort of put our money where our mouth is. Are we willing to fund something like this and pay for it? And from that, some of the feedback that came back was sort of relative to the programs, the aquatic programs, some of those exercise, lesson, and leisure activities kind of rose to the top in that feedback. In sports and fitness, the running track was probably the highest discussed and highest priority. But then sort of from that point down, fitness centers, some group exercise spaces, and some of the more traditional sport and recreation spaces. And then, of course, a large multi-activity gym sort of rounded out that piece. And then with community spaces, a lot of multi-use. And again, I think echoed what we talked about on Friday, that a lot of the requests or expectations for this project, both in the community outreach and all of the meetings that we held, really focused around multi-use space. Give us lots of flexible stuff that we can use, change over time, and adapt to, not as much specialized amenity. And so I think that was really important, and it sort of echoed with the report that we produced. Some of the themes that came out of that, again, I think these were really kind of guiding principles that set us forth on the process. We wanted to be inclusive. We wanted to make sure that both in our planning of the amenities as well as the fee structures and other things we discussed, that it was is accessible and easily usable by everyone in the community, that it was intergenerational, that it wasn't just focused on younger or older, but was sort of collective and brought everyone together. And really that it focused on a lot of the indoor amenities that are missing within the community, the unmet needs that came about. And so I think that was nice to hear. Oh, outdoor recreation. That was probably the number one thing we heard in all of the feedback. This is an outdoor community. People like to be outdoors in Shawnee, biking, riding, hiking, walking, and so that resonated as well. Greatest concerns, obviously funding, tax measure, and is this something that we can afford to own, essentially, as a community? And I think that was pretty important, so we've talked a lot about that, and we'll share some of the feedback. Obviously, understanding how it relates to the broader community, and is there some effort to make sure that it engages people from the entire community in all 4 wards? I think this came up in the Friday conversation about what happens to the Civic Center, for instance. What's the future of the Civic Center? And I think as a team, what we've discussed is it really makes sense to understand that facility and how it would complement this type of facility. Maybe you have more classroom-based uses or rental-based uses. It has that wonderful kitchen. So maybe there is some investment or some attention paid to that existing center. And then obviously making sure that the programming is complementary so they're not duplicating services and duplicating programs. So I think that's another thing that we wanted to make sure we covered and talked about. And finally, some of the broadest appeal. We kind of asked people, what do you think would really touch the most people in the community? And an indoor pool kind of rose to the top, kind of sort of across the board. Gym and indoor space, indoor track space, fitness classes. Bouldering kind of came out of left field, climbing and bouldering. That's, again, one of those very specialized spaces. Racquetball and a couple other uses that came out of that. And then some additional comments, and these were just sort of themes that sort of reoccurred through the process. And these are more specific. These are more targeted to the actual amenities that we're talking about planning. But things like silver sneakers and making sure that we operate programs that sort of are more inclusive and open up more opportunities for different users. So Darren's going to run through the market analysis. Were there any questions about the background? Anything about what we covered through the beginnings of the process? No? Good? All right.
Thank you for having me. I got home from vacation about 2 o'clock yesterday, and I think I was on the phone with Neil and Tanya by about 4:45 yesterday afternoon. So excited to be back and go through this information with you guys. So when we went ahead and we first started this process, we went ahead and we identified some service areas, kind of looking at the city of Shawnee proper as the primary service area, and then extending to that 5-mile radius of a secondary service area to include the eastern portion of Shawnee. We did look at drive times in concentric circles when we went ahead and we started talking about the facility. Because of the major thoroughfares that you have next to you and running through your community, those drive times extended significantly north, south, east. So we went ahead and we went with that more conservative 5-mile radius. In particular, of the facility components Chris is going to talk about later, the one that could have that larger regional extended drive time would be that indoor turf space. So again, we're trying to be conservative as we're approaching this and understanding who some of the other providers in the area are. We often get asked through these processes, what are some of the key trends? So when people go ahead and sit down and say, Darren Ballard King, what's going to make a facility like this successful? And we'll put successful in quotes, right? So everybody defines that differently. We typically look for communities or service areas that have more than 50,000 people in them. We typically look for a lower median age, understanding that youth and families are significant participants. However, we do understand that people are participating in activities longer. But again, if you're looking at key components that kind of point to success, that's one that we look at. Median household income, we're looking for something that's higher than the national number, but also in concert with the cost of living. So really, really high median household income and you have an extremely high cost of living, it has to be balanced. Okay. The other thing that we look for is kind of the culture of participation within the community. So are they participating in programs? Where are they going and getting their services? So when you start to look at those key trends that lead to that, again, success of a facility, indoor facility, City of Shawnee goes ahead and has a lot of those. Some of these charts are different than what you saw last time. The information has not changed. Just the chart has been condensed a little bit so it's a little easier to read and nobody's straining their eyes and trying to put themselves asleep on a Tuesday night. So again, when we start looking at this, we start looking at population, households, families, average household size. Again, City of Shawnee, that secondary service area, when I talked about that total population, you're kind of hitting those benchmarks. So that would point to you at least have within the city proper a population that would go ahead and support that type of indoor public facility. We also did some analysis on a ward-by-ward basis, just understanding that there is some differences as we make our way from ward to ward. The information up there goes ahead and shows you population, also compares median age, also does some comparison with median income. And then the last line goes ahead and provides you a comparison, again, based on the 2010 census data of number of households with children in them. So again, kids, young families are significant users of these types of facilities, but it was 5 years ago and I was reading an article that said the highest rate of orthopedic surgery was on 55 and older because people didn't want to stop participating in activities and they didn't want to stop being active. So these facilities really are multi-generational, multi-use. Again, just to kind of re-emphasize the distribution of the population within the City of Shawnee, you're going ahead and essentially 24% of your population is under 18 years of age. You have another 14% that's 65 years and older. The difference on the right-hand side, the column or the cells that are highlighted in green just shows you a positive variance. So again, that probably rings true. So you have younger families, you also have a significant older population. So as you go ahead and as you move through this facility, it's going to be important to look at activities that address the full spectrum of age. Some basic graphs, again, going ahead and kind of comparing demographic information. The purple column is the City of Shawnee, the red is that secondary service area, the green is the state of Kansas, and then the yellow is nationally. So again, whether you're talking about the city, the secondary, or the state, the median age and median projected age is lower than what you're seeing on a national number. So a very positive indicator when you start talking about who may participate and use the facility. Same thing when you talk about demographics in income levels within the city, within the secondary service area, you're a significantly higher median household income compared to the state level and compared to the national level. Again, a key finding, key indicator when you start talking about success of a facility. We use Esri, which is our online service provider for demographic information. And one of the things that they go ahead and provide us through consumer spending information is what they call a spending potential index. The best way I can go ahead and describe that to you is that yellow column that's there is the national number of 100. So if you're below the level, below 100, you're spending less on a level. If you're above 100, you're spending more. So you can see in the city of Shawnee and in the secondary service area for things like participation sports, recreational lessons, social recreation, entertainment, exercise equipment, other sports equipment, the rate of spending is approximately 25 to 30% higher in those two areas than what you're seeing on the national level. Again, those are dollars that people are already spending. And I think that's important for council to hear that, is that, you know, as you go ahead and if you're talking about introducing something new to the market, those are dollars that are currently being spent. So you can actually see that number go ahead and go up, or you could go ahead and you could see some of that spending be redistributed based upon wants and needs within the population. Another important factor about that information is those dollars aren't necessarily being spent in the city of Shawnee. Okay, so when you go ahead and when you say, okay, the spending potential for participant sports is 128 within the city. Okay, is all of that money being spent within the city of Shawnee? No, that's what's being spent by residents of the city of Shawnee that fall within that service area. This is where your eyes start to glare over and everything gets blurry with all the numbers. So we went ahead and we used all the same activities that you've seen. So you've seen this data before, it's just in a different order. The average column that you have there is participation percentages based on the National Sporting Goods Association. They do an annual survey of how Americans want to spend their time. They produce that information based upon age distribution, they produce it based on income levels, region of the country, and then they give you a national number. So based on the age distribution within the city of Shawnee, the median household income, the region of the country that you're in, and the national number, we give you a unique participation percentage for each of those activities. The top four that you find here are actually what we typically find across the country. So exercise walking, 36.6%, exercise with equipment, 19.6%, swimming, aerobic exercise, running and jogging. Very common that we see those in the top five. In fact, the top three are the top three nationally. We then take that percentage and apply it to the 2010, 2018, 2023 population within the city or within the service area, which happens to be the city. So you can go ahead and when you start to talk about components, okay, you start to talk about something like an indoor walking track and say, wow, that seemed like it was a pretty high want by everybody, but maybe instead, in addition to an indoor walking track, maybe we're going to have treadmills or maybe we're going to have elliptical machines. You can really start to talk about what percentage of the population might participate in some of those activities. And then we go ahead and we kind of extrapolate that out and show growth in terms of those activities. The second slide that you're seeing here is the second group of numbers. So we went ahead and put that on highest percentage participation down to lowest percentage of participation. That's not to go ahead and not to diminish any of those other activities that have a lower participation percentage. It's simply to go ahead and say there's not as many people that go ahead and participate. So I'm going to pick on gymnastics tonight because we didn't put wrestling in there and I can't pick on my kids. So it says 2.3% of the population goes ahead and participates in gymnastics. Okay? How many 50-year-old gymnasts do we have in the room tonight? Okay? Not many, right? But when we go ahead and we look at something like exercise walking on the previous page, that's something that whether you're 5 years old or whether you're 85 years old, you can go ahead and participate in. So as you look at these activities, it's important to understand that some of them, those top four, go ahead and touch on the full age spectrum. Other activities like tackle football, martial arts, lacrosse, aren't going to go ahead and aren't necessarily going to touch on the full age spectrum. Doesn't make them any less important, but it means that when you start to look at some of those activities with a lower participation percentage, how do we go ahead and how do we double up on spaces? So in other words, could you go ahead and could you use a turf field for a cheerleading practice and for a lacrosse practice and for softball infielding and for baseball? So you're not looking at going ahead and building those specialty facilities for those low participation percentages. The last line on this particular chart is something else that I think is important for the council to hear, is National Sporting Goods Association has also started to track do not participate. So they go ahead and track the participation of about 55 different activities. So what that goes ahead and tells us is of those 55 activities, there's about 21% of the population within the city that isn't going to participate. Either they don't have the interest or they don't have the means to participate. So when we go ahead and we talk about we want to do something for everyone, in some cases that becomes very, very difficult because it gets so niche and so minute that it's really, you're expending a lot of resources to go ahead and serve a small population. Again, coming from Esri and the demographic information they provide, they also provide some participation information. And the column on the left, all of this is adult participation, but the column on the left is your more traditional activities like aerobics, basketball, golf, soccer, swimming, those types of activities. It gives the number of adults that they expect. It gives an average participation percentage, and then it gives you your market potential again, right? So in comparison to 100, how many of those numbers are greater? How many of those numbers are less? The chart that I think is more important for council to pay attention to is the chart that's on the right, okay? So when we start talking about things like members of AARP, attended an adult education course, went to an art gallery, read a book, went to a museum, attended a rock music, went ahead and did painting or drawing. A big differentiator in public recreation facilities is it's not just sports and games. Okay, that we are going to go ahead and provide socialization opportunities. We are going to provide enrichment programming. We are going to go ahead and provide that full spectrum of activities. And I think what that chart on the right goes ahead and really shows is that there is a significant interest in those types of enrichment activities and continuing education activities within the city and within that primary service area. So again, as you begin to talk about this, you start talking about what makes us different. That's one of those things that makes you different. Chris and I think, are both going to try and go after the survey here.
And I think Lindsay has a question.
I'm sorry,
no, you're
questions.
fine.
I jumped right out.
Lindsay,
I apologize. Go ahead.
I just wanted to clarify the chart.
Yeah.
So does that mean that we're above average compared nationally, and all of the ones that are green, and then
Correct.
soccer and volleyball were slightly below?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
That's exactly what that means. In a lot of cases, you know, again, you're pointing to a vibrant community. I'm not telling you anything you don't know, and that there are indoor opportunities around the community. So if you saw those numbers that were still really, really low, it would kind of be, wait a minute, why is it like that?
Okay. Thank you.
Yep, I apologize. Any other questions on kind of the market data? Okay, cool. Survey it is.
All right, sure. So on Friday, Ryan, who conducted the survey, explained all this information. So I'm going to channel Ryan. I'm going to pretend that I can walk through a non-statistically valid survey. But I think one of the things to recognize in this data and just the survey instrument was that it was pretty well targeted toward information that we needed to glean. Right? We didn't just ask a whole bunch of open-ended questions. Do you want? Do you want? Do you want? We really tried to structure these questions in such a way that it really got to the heart of the questions. Are these things that are actually unmet needs, and are you willing to pay for them? So we administered a survey. It was relatively brief. We tried to keep it within about a dozen questions because beyond that point, people begin to bow out of a survey. And so the goal was to complete 400 of these to get us a really good statistically valid representation. We had 543 respondents. I think we all know that in Shawnee we tend to get good survey responses. It's just, again, an engaged and active community. So that gave us basically a confidence level or a margin of error about 4.2% and a 95% confidence level. So for those that aren't statisticians, that basically means that if you administered the survey 100 times, 95 out of 100 times, statistics would tell you that you would get a similar result within that margin of error. And so I think the other big piece of this survey is to recognize that it also was sort of a well-distributed slice of the population in both age and in ward. So it wasn't sort of skewed toward one age group and it wasn't skewed toward one portion of the city. It was pretty well distributed. So from that, we gleaned some pretty good information. Usage in recreation programs is very high. We'll show you some statistics and also talk about some of that as it relates to the questions and answers that we received. Over half, about 54% of respondents indicated their household has participated in at least one program. That's considerably higher, again, than the national average. National average is about 34% participation in recreation programs. So again, you're seeing a trend here, and it certainly supports some of these conclusions. What we found, and you'll see this in the data, but the highest priority indoor activities included indoor aquatic amenities. We sort of knew that was coming. That elevated running, walking track, and then fitness equipment or fitness areas, general fitness areas. The highest priority programs, this is different than facilities, programs included a farmer's market, which was a fun addition to the survey. We were surprised to see that. I think actually someone asked what were the surprises, and that was the surprise. Fitness and wellness programs, and then indoor court sports. So again, recognizing those broader programs that can be accomplished in a wide variety of facility spaces. And then we wanted to target aquatics specifically because, first of all, it's so expensive to build, it's so expensive to operate, and it seemed to be one of those that, depending on what you define aquatics to be, people have very differing opinions as to what that means. And so from that, we found that recreational swimming was highly important. Lazy river kind of rose to the top of the amenities we asked about, which was nice to see. And then some level of multi-lane lap swimming or lap pool. And so those were the pieces that came out of that. So we did ask a question about participation. What do you currently participate in and how much? And we found that, again, a pretty high level of people are participating. Only 12% of respondents said they have not visited any facilities in the past 12 months. So you can see sort of the distribution of participation, which, again, I thought this was a little bit surprising. We would have probably expected to see a little higher level than that. So I thought this was good. And it did show that, again, 1 to 2 times per month, 25%, that's another high level participation. This is the chart that basically talks about the recreation programs that are offered by the city and how many people have participated in those. And again, this is that same statistic of 54% of respondents have participated in those programs, again, relative to an average nationally of about 34%. So again, you can see fairly high level of participation. I want to point out from our previous update to our presentation, we've kind of called out some of the charts, been a little more streamlined for you all because a lot of them were a bit redundant. So this basic question, this was question 6 on the survey that just responded to what is your unmet need, or what are the amenities that you believe you have a need for. And again, in this response, 71% said they had a need or an expectation for indoor aquatic facilities. 61% said they had a need for indoor walking and jogging track, and 59% said they needed basically a fitness amenity or fitness area. And then down the line, exercise, outdoor aquatic facilities, gymnasium, and locker rooms. And then beyond that, they started kind of tapering off into more specialized spaces that saw a little less need. And then a follow-up question was, again, not related to facilities, but was related to programs and activities. And in this question, question 9, this was also, again, reflective of that feedback. Roughly 69% said there was a need for some level of a farmer's market as a program amenity. Fitness and wellness programs were about 59%. And again, rounding out the top of that list, running, walking clubs and programs, indoor court sports, cooking classes found its way in, which we thought was interesting, even though through most of our feedback, kitchens were not supported, but cooking classes were. So we'll have to figure out how to design a building without a kitchen that can provide cooking classes, or maybe that happens at the Civic Center. So the point being is, I think the programs definitely gave us some insight into the facility and amenities that people were asking for. So we thought that was pretty insightful as well. And then finally, we again tried to target this down on specifically the pool area to understand that in a little bit more detail. And again, the responses for need in aquatic amenities, the top of that was recreational swimming. Behind that, lazy river, a multi-lane lap pool, and we gave some parameters so that people understood what that meant. And then other things that were high amenity desires were lounge space, deck space, some aqua aerobics or exercise programs relative to the pool, and then more specialized things like water slides, zero depth entry, and so forth. What you will notice from this is of those amenities, many of them are recreational amenities. They're just more specific. And so you start seeing a trend here that indoor aquatics represents both some level of recreation and some level of performance or lap swimming or competition. And that's something we'll talk about a little bit later as to how we may meet that demand or meet that need. And so based on all of the other data that was part of the survey, the tail end of that survey really related to willingness to pay and would people support a measure. And so when that question was asked, I think it's important to point out that there was some pretty specific data provided on mill levy calculations, so people were able to sort of use that chart to specifically say, based on my home value, this is what my expectation for a tax would be. And even with that sort of additional data, I think it gave us a great high level of confidence that people understood what they were in for if they do indeed put their support in this project. And so basically 48% said they would likely vote in favor, and then about 18% said they might vote in favor. So for a collective of about 66% leaning on the positive, and then the balance, 2% didn't answer, 17% said they'd vote against, and then about 15%, said they weren't sure. So we always want to know when someone's not sure, what does that mean? And relative to recreation, we also asked the question 17A, help us explain why you weren't sure. And again, about 41%, and this sort of aligns with what we would have expected to see, just not interested in additional taxes, or more specifically feel like the people that use the facility ought to bear the burden of that cost rather than the general populace. About 31% said they needed more information. And again, we'd like to hear that because that means more information will get you to make a decision on that support or non-support, and that helps us understand better how to communicate in a potential campaign. And then beyond that, it was I wouldn't use the facility, or I believe there's sufficient recreational amenities already. And so you can see again just sort of the makeup of that sort of middle ground of the vote population. So based on that, I think again the summary at the end is the summary in the beginning. We believe there's adequate support for this based on the survey data and sort of your market potential. Based on some of that not sure feedback, we feel like some additional information could help sort of clarify or amplify the responses that we got. It might be sort of a next step in the process. And then again, the priority facilities, I won't reiterate them, you've heard those, but it relates to indoor aquatics, court space, walking, jogging, farmers market, and other fitness uses. So based on that, we basically took all that information and began to craft a building program that we feel is representative of that. Are there any questions about the survey data before we move into the program and the plan diagrams? Crystal clear.
We're good.
I love it.
Thank you.
All right. Well, this is the fun part. So based on that, we created a base facility program, which we feel captured the vast majority of those higher priority uses within the facility makeup. And I tried to kind of summarize these. One thing we added since Friday, just to kind of give you a percentage. I love when you kind of do that disk cleanup on your computer and shows those big boxes where all your files are in those tiny boxes. This helps us see where the makeup of this facility goes. And so the warm water leisure pool with some lap lanes, about 16,000 feet, that makes up about a quarter of our facility all in. And I think this is something we pointed out in our previous meeting, that pool, and you'll see in the diagram, includes 3 sort of recreational lap swimming lanes. When we get to talking about some of the lap swimming, we'll kind of compare those and help kind of describe the differences. A 2-court multi-activity gym. It's about 14,000 square feet. It's about 22% of the facility. That turf field house space, and again, this is something that ranked relatively high in our feedback and open house, kind of fell to the middle through the surveys, depending. But we also felt like it was one that was vastly supported by the number of programs that can take advantage. So we thought it was pretty important, and it also has a great O&M benefit. It's a revenue generator for a lot of activities, and I think is a good addition to the program. That's about 7,800 square feet.
Where does that stand?
I will give you what I consider the right answer to that. I think that's the trend in Parks and Recreation. I don't think a lot of the neighboring facilities have that. I think it's something unique. I think in certain parts of the country, particularly the West Coast and even in Colorado, we're seeing a lot of indoor field house facilities. It's sort of the new wave of recreation. Up until this point, those have tended to be private facilities, indoor soccer facilities or private turf facilities. And I think the reason they can be successful is they have a good program base, meaning that they have a good group of youth sports and adult active sports that support them to hit the private market. But if a community offers, they can broaden that use. This can be everything from youth camps and clinics. And so if I was to be asked, I think it's the trend. And I think it's a differentiator in this market, which I think is a good thing. Yeah, that's a good point out. The closest public is a New Century, if you didn't hear Darren. Yeah. We're probably working on 8 or 10 studies of those right now in the West, so it's sort of the new wave, I would say. And then I think relative to that, I mean, again, that supports a lot of these activities that we talked about, indoor sports, but also running and walking. So obviously we're talking about an elevated track, but that's also something that you're seeing a trend in is things like performance clinics, speed clinics, those other types of things. They tend to be more private sector, but again, in a public facility, you can offer camps, boot camps, and other things that happen in there. So the fitness center, again, we've sort of included some level of outdoor fitness activity as well. That's about 5,700 square feet, so it makes up about 9% of the facility. Much smaller than you normally see in kind of the retail market, but still kind of a nice sort of balanced program, probably leaning more toward some of those more multi-purpose fitness programs and cardio versus sort of a high performance sport or strength training type of space. Group exercise studio to kind of round out the balance of aerobic and dance programs, but also really catered toward things like youth programs and adult programs as well. Multi-purpose classrooms, we showed 3 of those because those we believe are really useful to a good enrichment program with different types of passive classes and other activities. And then the round out of it is basically the support spaces, lobby, reception, locker rooms, plenty of family change spaces for those pools, administrative staff, and building support. So about 63,300 square feet of program. That's comparable to other facilities within Johnson County, and I think touched on the vast majority of the activities and preferences that we heard in both the survey and in our outreach. And these are just some images of the types of amenities. When we talk about leisure aquatics, this is what that might look like. These are other facilities that we've designed. Multi-activity court gym. Traditionally that's a gym that has a surface that's more flexible and conducive to other things other than traditional court sports. But on the right, you see one that has both. There's that turf field house, and that could be anything from sort of an indoor soccer type of space to more of a training or exercise space. There's that indoor walking, jogging track, in case you can picture that. And there's some fitness type of spaces. These are probably of the scale that we're talking, or at least the type of space that we're programming. Some group fitness space, and again, there's some images of both dance and fitness. There's a picture of a rooftop fitness space that we thought would be kind of nice. And then some of those multi-use classroom uses. Lobby, lounge. Connected to that site, beautiful views. I can picture it now.
Yeah, Justin, did you have a question?
Yeah, I have a question. So the photos don't show it, and I'm sure it's there. Will there be free weights included in the exercise? We were having a discussion about neighboring gyms, and a lot of neighboring gyms have free weights, and I just didn't see it in the photos, so I just was curious.
If I was to answer that question, I'd say, first of all, if this project was passed by the electorate and move forward, I think you'd go through a more detailed and rigorous design of your fitness program, but it's more traditional in a community program to focus more on both sort of cardio, selectorized, probably more ergonomic type of equipment, probably a smaller percentage of free weight. And I think the market's changing a lot from the days when people lined up on treadmills watching CNN to more sort of functional training, a lot more modular training. So, it used to be a traditional layout of a fitness center was as many pieces of equipment as you could cram into an area. And frankly, now when we design a fitness center, our clients go, well, where's all the equipment? It looks kind of empty. Well, it's more modular pieces that are able to do more. But that's my guess is what it might focus on, but I'm not the one planning that facility. I think you'd probably want to work both with your recreation staff and the programs, as well as look at what the other providers in the market are showing and make sure that, we're complementary to that, not in direct competition, because I don't think that benefits anybody to duplicate what people can find. So hopefully that answers the question. So based on that 63,383 foot facility, we collect and are generating data on buildings, although it's escalating at a pretty breakneck pace, but working in some neighboring communities as well as within the Rocky Mountain region and Midwest, we have quite a bit of construction data that kind of tells us, having not gone through a detailed design nor a detailed price estimate, we believe this is a good rough order of magnitude for what that facility would cost. So roughly $24.8 million of building construction. We have about $2.5 million in site construction, and we'll show you a site plan and what that includes. We have about 28% factor for soft costs, and that's a pretty good chunk of the total budget for a total project of about $34.7 million. And within those soft costs, and I think Lauren gave a great presentation on Friday about just the delivery method of a project. This sort of relates to that. It's things like project contingency, about 10%. Escalation, we factored in about 3%, although that's probably not enough, frankly. Design and engineering fees are somewhere in the 7 to maybe as high as 8% range. Equipment and furnishings is somewhere between 6 and 7% of your budget to make sure we open a building that's functional and has all the things we need in it. And then just general miscellaneous project expenses above and beyond that. So that gives you kind of a full sort of turnkey approach to the cost of this project. And then what we also wanted to make sure we understood was how does this relate to that request for lap swimming and that costly amenity. So one of the reasons we sort of pulled that out was just certainly the cost of it, but when you see the operational impacts, it's something that we believe if it was a priority, it probably warrants some level of partnership, considering those are the programs that are most shared with not only competitive users, but school district. And so for the addition to the base facility to add a 6-lane, 25-yard lap pool, that's about 8,500 square feet of space and about $5.6 million. And to add an 8-lane pool of a similar design would be about 11,000 square feet and about $7.5 million. And I think one of the questions that came up was, well, what's the difference between a 6 and an 8-lane pool? The 6-lane pool, what we estimate, is really more of a training pool. It's more for practice. It could hold a dual meet. It could satisfy that need, but it's not optimal for a dual meet. And so basically, when you see the operational revenue, we essentially consider that as sort of a recreational amenity for the purposes of revenue, meaning if you're coming to the facility, whether you're on a swim team or you're any other user, you're paying the same fee to come in the building, therefore revenues are essentially kept standard, whereas in the 8-lane option, we showed revenue because that would generate swim meets and generate some additional revenue above and beyond a standard user. Yes, sir.
The question is,
Yes, I think I understand the question you're asking, and I think the answer is you could eliminate those 3 lanes, and I think I have that data in my report, so I'm going to grab that before the end of the meeting. It does.
Yeah.
It does. It does. And one thing you could say is those 3 lanes have a purpose of things like exercise classes, lessons. But you could also say, look, if we build this big pool in addition, this lab pool, we could probably satisfy those needs within that pool as well. And so this doesn't take account for that. These are additive costs. So I will make sure I pull what we factored into that recreational pool for those 3 lanes and understand. Because you could find that efficiency and probably lower the total cost. Yes, that's the answer.
Justin?
What's the average cost for a school district like DeSoto to rent the facility for swim practice? Did we figure that number out?
We had talked to, Neil Holman, Parks and Rec. We had talked to DeSoto School District, and they go to Olathe and rent So they, it's about $15,000 a year for their season. So when we did our stakeholders, we did talk to Maranatha's looking at developing a team. St. James was very interested. They have to go to, everyone has to be bused to Olathe. And then in some of the talks, we did talk to the school district, just a kind of a talk, a coffee talk. Wasn't anything formal, but they could have dollars that they could do capital or for renting. And so looking at that, we would probably prefer the capital dollars up front.
Sure.
Because we're talking million, couple million versus 15,000 a year. So that would take a long time. That's a difference. So it'd take a long time to get up.
Thank you.
Yeah, Eric?
25-yard flat pool, does that even conform to the size requirements for any kind of meets or anything? I mean,
It
I thought
does.
they were normally meters,
does.
first of all, and then you're talking 50 meters, and so you got a 50-meter.
I got that one. Yeah.
Freestyle would be one time down.
I'll give you in as short of a explanation as I can, because we could probably do a whole nother hour on competitive pool design. There are several stages to the way competitive aquatics is designed. 50 meter is pretty much Olympic only. It's also generally outdoor summer course, masters swimming. There are a few folks, but 50 meter is not really the standard for high school swimming, nor is it the standard for NCAA. So until you get to different sort of echelons of swimming, 50 meters isn't really the requirement. A lot of people would say they love it because of frankly, the number of cross lanes that are offered. So when you talk about a traditional, say, high school swim meet, it's based on either a 25-yard or 25-meet model. And again, that can vary depending on the state, depending on the method. A lot of districts will say, well, our standard is 25-meter, but we have 15 pools in the district and 14 of them are 25 yards. So we tend to swim at one, even though our standard is maybe sort of stipulated as the other. So before we finalize that pool design, we would do some more outreach and understand, okay, where do we fit within the broad range of requirements? So the 25-yard pool is sort of the benchmark. Now, the number of lanes relates to how many heats you can run in a meet, how long your meet will run. Do you have warm-up and cool-down spaces? Can you have, say, lap lanes for training while additional lanes are open to drop in rec? So the number of lanes becomes most critical when we're talking about a pool. And that's why that 6 and 8 lane becomes critical, because 6 lanes is probably the minimum you need to really operate a viable program to allow a meet to happen, to allow training to happen, and still have enough for drop in when those are swimming. So 8 lane is sort of your sort of optimal meet facility, and that's probably, if you were to talk to the school district, that's probably the pool they would ask for, if I was to guess. So that's sort of in a nutshell, and I'm sure there's probably a million other things that come about, considering there's 3,500 of these things across the western United States, so it's not rocket science designing a lap pool.
Oh, Lindsay, yeah.
Oops. Oh, sorry. And we may be getting to this, but I know on the chart that talked about the cost that we would be paying per month based on, are we getting to that?
Yes.
Okay, and will we have information about if we choose the 6 or 8 lane option, let's say a $300,000 house, it now is $16 a month. Do we have that information? As far as the mill levy?
We didn't update the mill levy based on the additional options, no.
Would we be able to have an idea of the general, it's like an
Probably
increase
could.
of $2 or $5?
If I had to go on record, no, but I think we could probably give
Okay.
you a gut check on that, yeah.
Okay,
I think we
thank
can.
you.
I mean, the mill levy takes some calculation based on but we know what a mill's worth, and we can take some guesstimates at that, yeah. So did that sort of cover the questions about the different programs and the amenities that are sort of included and the differences? Again, we're happy to go back and delve back into that as you guys come up with other ideas. We just tried to do our best to sort of spell out in the most succinct way. But obviously, if we dig into the numbers, we could really give a good explanation of some of these things. So we took these ideas and we looked at this beautiful site at Woodland and 61st and thought, how would this facility most optimally fit this nice, beautiful piece of property? You can see the photos. It's nice open land with great views, and even in Google Maps, it's got the train parked there 24/7, which I think is awesome. Might help us inform the design of the building. So we looked at that site a little more carefully, and this is an overall that's going to be hard to read, so I'm going to blow up pretty quickly. But generally, the way the site is organized, I don't know if I can get I won't worry about that. To the south of this sort of property, you get more of the open space, and that also sits within the floodplain. So we've kind of identified that as sort of passive and active outdoor recreation, so things like cyclocross, for instance, or nature trails, or other uses. So as you sort of go from the north to south, we sort of organize the parking more toward the north. Again, easy access to the front of the building, good safe access from parking into the building. And the real key to that is making sure that the building really has sort of clear, unfettered access to that outdoor space. So the facility kind of from the north to the south goes from more developed or more manicured to sort of a more naturalized feel. But what you can see with the building is lots of outdoor activity as well, and I think that's kind of the key to this site. We kind of identified a possible place for that farmer's market within the parking lot and turf area. You can see if we did that field house off to the right of the field house, sort of at the north of that orange plan, there's that little patch of light green. We thought that could be a great outdoor turf field area for sports and workout. You've got the pool deck and sort of outdoor viewing areas that can kind of overlook the site. And then we've got that great pond and potential for picnic pavilions and outdoor trails and connection to Clear Creek. So I think the site is organized in a way that really leverages its benefits and its potential to say we're putting recreation on the site indoors, but the connectivity of the outdoors is equally important. And I think that's really the magic of this site and having it sort of identified for both indoor and outdoor recreation. So I thought it worked out very nicely. I'm going to stop and ask if there's any questions about sort of the site or anything that we're showing there before we jump into the floor plans. Okay. So again, I should caveat this by saying these look like floor plans, but just consider them detailed diagrams, because I think there was a question about things like doors, and they're not necessarily fully vetted plans, but they do start showing adjacencies of the types of spaces as well as the scale of those spaces. They aren't oriented as they're shown in the site, so that's a little confusing, but the entry is sort of to the bottom of the page. We've got this sort of gray, that's sort of the grand central hall that sort of feeds all the different activities, provides visibility into the gym, the pool, and other spaces. That sort of teal green space off to the right of the entry, that's those multi-purpose classroom spaces. The red off to the left of the entry is that staff, administrative support space. The gym is in the wood color tan, and the turf gym in that sort of spruce green, and obviously the pool in the bright blue, and then locker rooms in yellow. So I think you get a good sense of the sort of central nature of this building. It does have this sort of Main Street or almost a mall quality where you've got this grand central space that feeds all the activities. And we think that's a nice way to organize it from the site standpoint. You get to the upper level, and that's where you see the elevated track and the sort of fitness almost in a mezzanine scenario where it kind of overlooks the other spaces, the lobby, the gym, and the pool, and the group exercise, and then the potential for some of that deck space or even green roof type of space, roof deck type of spaces. So, I mean, I think it sets itself up nicely for that type of arrangement. And then if you look at the plan as to how you might integrate that added 8-lane pool, you can see it up to the top right there. Ignore all the funny angles and we just were trying to make it look less square, but that's how you'd probably integrate that. And as you mentioned, the lap lanes in that particular scenario on the leisure pool go away, and in return, we're building a potentially a larger competitive lap pool. So that sort of shows how those look in the floor plan. Are there any questions about that? Okay. And there's a picture of one of our facilities that we thought had kind of a nice park-like setting and thought had a kind of a care, quality, and sort of vibrant feel that we thought might reflect Shawnee when we hopefully end up designing something here at some point. It might have that sort of character.
Question: the way this is setting up fast, is this, where does this fit in the lead spectrum as far as construction, or is that?
No, we in the RFQ when we sent out the RFQ, we would look for lead type elements, but probably wouldn't pay to have the, to have it sealed lead. But we would try to be as green as possible and stay with the budget.
It's a very expensive plaque. Eric?
It is a very expensive plaque.
Since we're talking about the construction design and all that kind of stuff, I wanted to bring up a concern I have. When we look at a building like this, we do live in a fairly tornado-prone part of the United States. And I just wonder if any provisions have been made or looked into as far as a safe area within this facility where people could, I guess, duck and cover and turn in. We've got an F4 or F5 coming roaring through town.
Just jump in the water.
That's a good question. Obviously, when you see glass, you think that's probably prone to, one of the things I would say with all of those natural disasters is that, when we think about buildings, we think about buildings that are resilient, and this project's actually in Canada where they don't have tornadoes, so that's probably not a appropriate solution. I think something our firm is very interested in is this idea of resiliency. When you put an occupied environment in a place, you need to understand the challenges of that place. And if we put it near a floodplain, you better darn well understand how that building relates to the floods. If you put it in a tornado-prone area, you better understand how it relates to those. So that's why this building doesn't exist in Shawnee. It exists somewhere else. I will say, though, that building codes and a lot of things deal with safety, life safety. I also will say that in a lot of cases, when you build a building of this scale, a big question that comes about is, does this want to be some level of public shelter, emergency shelter, and is it designed as such? So that's a big question. When you build 63,000 feet of public space, the next inevitable question is, does that space become useful for emergency relief? And so those are questions we'd love to have answers to at some point if this project moved forward, is how are we designing it to be resilient to its environment and offer a public service as well. So I can answer your question. The less glass.
It's not just glass. I spent 30 years with FEMA putting things back together again, so I'm very deeply involved in that process.
No, it's a great question. It is. And buildings you don't think have problems will have problems.
That's correct.
It's not just the...
So the other hat that I wore in a different lifetime was a competitive swimmer, and will swim pretty much anywhere. I swam on a high school meet that was a 4-lane 20-yard pool. So that was give you an idea of how silly we can get. We're going to talk a little bit about operations and other things as it relates to the future of the facility. Some of these numbers have been updated with additional information since you last viewed them. This map you've not seen before. So what we did with this is we identified where the future community recreation facility would be, where the civic center is at, and then some other providers that are in the area. So what you'll see here is that the green pegs identify current and future, because Miriam is in there, municipal recreation or community facilities. The blue pegs, it says YMCA. It's actually YMCA and other nonprofit providers that are in the area. The red pegs are what I would call regional providers. So there's 3 that are identified there. One of them is the field house at Oaken Field House. The other is New Century Field House. And then the third is the 50-meter pool that's being developed by the school district. So it gives you an idea of some of the other providers that are actually in the area that you're moving into. Doesn't show up great, but we also went ahead and looked at private providers. And again, this is me doing a really quick Google search this morning. If you see those little numbers next to the pins, it goes ahead and it tells you that the map zoomed out too much and there's actually multiple locations within proximity. So approximately 21 different providers in that area represented on that map. A lot of those providers are very specific in terms of what they're providing. So by that I mean there is a karate studio in there, there's a CrossFit studio in there. The one that is probably most like what you're looking at is close to that Canyon Fitness Golf Club, which is the Lifetime Fitness that also sits right across the street from Lenex's Recreation Center. The question always comes up is, how do we go ahead and how do we blend with what the private sector is doing and what we might do as the public in a public facility? Chris was very great in explaining fitness becomes a primary topic of conversation in that. There's people within the community that are going to be much more comfortable to use a public facility versus a private facility. That's known. The other thing that we go ahead and we do is within the public facilities, being very strategic about what you include and what you don't include in the facility. For instance, if you go to the Recreation Center in Breckenridge, Colorado, you'll find Olympic lifting platforms, you'll find half a dozen squat racks, and a bunch of things of that nature. They're geared to a full-service fitness facility. For something like this, where we're in a market where those services are already being provided, it would be much more prudent for a public facility to go ahead and have things like plate select, circuit training, functional training, limited free weights, dumbbells, those types of things. The point being is, in many of the communities that we've worked where there's been a significant number of private providers, what we've actually seen is that the public sector has become a gateway into the private sector. The public sector, as it relates to recreation, is trying to provide as many programs and as many opportunities as possible to the public at large. They get a taste for it, they get an interest in it, and then they have opportunities on the private sector to further pursue those opportunities. When we look at some of the differentiators, when you start talking about some of the private providers and public providers, and for that matter, public-to-public providers as well, the focus on the individual versus the focus on the full family, going ahead and having a one-stop shop where everybody can participate in something. Going ahead and looking at fitness versus full service, like I just described, going ahead and providing a wealth of entry-level activities versus going ahead and providing the full spectrum. This is always a fun one. Focusing on drop-in recreation as a program. If you go to a public facility, you expect to be able to go there, and if I'm a member or if I pay my daily admission fee, I can go, there's at least one basketball court where I can go shoot hoops, or there's water available for me to go ahead and play with my kid in the pool or swim a couple laps or do those things. One of the things that some providers stray away from in their pursuit of 100% cost recovery facilities, they begin to eliminate that. And I think that is a differentiator, is that within public facilities, you really do go ahead and focus on drop-in recreation as a program and availability. Aquatics is a big differentiator. You don't see a lot of private aquatics facilities because they cost so much to build and they cost so much to operate. And I think the other side from a public perspective is going ahead and providing services for folks that can't necessarily afford a high-end experience. There's many public facilities that we go ahead and work with that have scholarship programs in place. In many cases, that's a great opportunity to go ahead and partner with the private sector and say, hey, are you willing to sponsor a family? Are you willing to sponsor a scholarship fund? Again, just some differentiators that we see on a national level. As we were going ahead and putting information together, we wanted to go ahead and compare rate structures with some of the other municipal providers and that operate recreation facilities. So going ahead and trying to do an apples-to-apples comparison, we looked at what an adult individual membership would be. And again, this is just your standard membership annual payment. And that gives you fees for Lenexa, Olathe, Mission, Overland Park, that's Matt Ross, that's not Tomahawk Ridge, and then the proposed fees in Shawnee. Because of our familiarity with the market, Mission was kind of the first to the market with Sylvester Powell. They have never operated at 100% cost recovery, but are trying to make their way towards that. Lenexa, we've been involved with from the very beginning, and they were 100% focused on 100% cost recovery, so their structure was that way. Same thing with Olathe. Overland Park is a bit of an outlier just because of the tax base that they have supporting them. They are a 100% cost recovery facility, but they have a lower fee as well. So we tried to go ahead and use an average. When we looked at those averages for an individual membership, where if you average those together, it was $389 annually or $38 a month. For a family or a household, depending on how you want to reference that, $646 annually or $61 a month. We tried to be competitive with that, knowing that we wanted to minimize any subsidy that might exist for a facility like this, but at the same point wanted to make sure it was affordable to as many people as possible within the community. The other thing that you'd find as you went ahead and as you looked at all those facilities, that there is a differential between residents versus non-residents, and the average differential is about 20%. So non-resident rates are approximately 20% higher than resident rates. We also went ahead and did some comparison of some private providers. We went ahead and this morning I did a little research on Lifetime Fitness in terms of what an individual rate was versus a household with 2 adults and 2 juniors. Did the same thing as it relates to Planet Fitness, took a look at Curves, which is an individual provider, took a look at Snap Fitness in terms of individual versus couple. Again, when I created the rate structure from the proposed rates, I focused more on the municipal providers, the other public providers. But this does give you an idea of what's taking place within the market. And again, it all depends upon the business model that you want to move into. So I think the rate structure that we've provided in terms of the feasibility study is a good jumping off point. When we looked at revenue and potential fee structure, we created some drop-in fees versus a resident versus non-resident, looking at a youth, an adult, a senior, a household. Also looking at an annual membership, a youth, an adult, a senior plus one, and a household. If you look at one of your competitors from the public side of the house, they have lots of different columns, lots of different options in terms of membership. For the feasibility study, I tried to keep things as simple as possible. I also went about it from the perspective of if I walked up to the front desk, how simple do I want the information so I can understand it and it can be passed on to me in a clear and concise fashion. When we start talking about various components, I think it's also important to talk about what we're seeing in terms of trends. So what you'll find here is the various facility components that Chris talked about earlier. And then next to that, just going ahead and using a high, medium, and low scale, we talked about operational costs and revenue potential. Okay, warm water leisure pool with lap lanes incorporated. Very high operational costs, okay? You don't get to turn those off at night, unfortunately, but they also come with a high revenue potential. In comparison to something like an elevated running track, low operational cost, low revenue potential. Any one of these components individually, the revenue potential goes ahead and drops. However, when you go ahead and you look at them collectively, the revenue potential increases. Again, when you're looking at an indoor facility, you're looking at a synergy of components. So that the different components that you have, if you just had an indoor pool, it would only appeal to a particular portion of the population. If you only had a fitness center, it would only appeal to a particular portion of the population. However, as you begin to combine those, you go ahead and you gain some synergies, you gain some opportunities, you gain some unique environments to create for families, parents, guardians, those types of things. So it just gives you what we're seeing on a national level in terms of operational versus revenue potential. And those can fluctuate based upon the approach that Neil and Tanya and the recreation staff take. You got to see a lot of different charts on Friday as it related to base model plus 6-lane, base model plus 8-lane. What we decided to do tonight is approach the information a little bit differently. So you have 4 columns. But the 3 columns that are important, you have base model year 3, base model plus 6-lane year 3, and base model plus 8-lane year 3. First question you're going to ask is, Darren, why are we using year 3? If you open a brand new facility, I would essentially just tell you to take the data that you collect in terms of usage, participation, all that other kind of stuff, and take the first 2 years and throw it out. It's not that you're not going to use it. It's not that you're not going to base some decisions on it. However, year 3 is the year where you finally hit your norm. If you don't make any major changes to the facility in the first 3 years, that's where you're at. So in addition, at the bottom, we have year 1, year 3, and year 5 cost recovery percentages. So the base model year 1, you're essentially at an 84% cost recovery rate. By year 3, you move up to about a 92% cost recovery rate. Year 6, you start at 80 and end up at 87 or 88. And then base plus 8 lanes, you start at about 77, 78%. You move up to 84, 85%. Some things to understand when we go ahead and we put the operational cost together. It's a fluctuating scale. There's all kinds of things that are moving. When people tell you that they have a facility that's 100% cost recovery, you need to go ahead and respond, explain that to me. Which costs are included? Do you go ahead and do you include your custodial and maintenance costs, or do those costs go over to parks? Do you go ahead and do you include what you're paying for snow removal and landscaping and those kinds of things, or does that go over to DPW? So how you go ahead and handle your accounting can greatly impact your 100% cost recovery rate. Is it possible to get there with the demographics you have in place and the program elements that you're talking about? Yes, it's possible. However, we always approach these things in a conservative fashion. So some factors to take into account When I talk about a conservative approach to membership numbers, not daily admissions, but memberships, you're talking about a 3 to 5% penetration rate, okay, within the city of Shawnee. Now you go ahead and say, okay, how does that compare? In many cases, when we talk with private providers, they're looking for a 5 to 10% penetration rate. So it's a little bit less, but you could hit that number. When we talk about the programs that are factored for revenue and participation, they're not factored at saturation. We're not telling you this is what the building would look like on a perfect day with 3,000 kids participating in swim lessons in 55 different leagues. It's talking about what's realistic for year one. We're also talking about all the revenue that's reflected in this is new revenue. We're not talking about taking all of the revenue that's currently generated at the Civic Center and shifting it over to the Recreation Center. This is new level of programming that would take place in this facility. I would tell you that having the Civic Center and the Recreation Center working in concert is an advantage because each of those facilities can become an incubator for programs occurring at the other facility. You can test programs at the Civic Center and then move them to the Recreation Center if you needed to. Vice versa, you could test programs at the Recreation Center and then move them to the Civic Center. So that is an asset having the two. The other thing to note for each of these is that we are going ahead and we're factoring capital improvement dollars. One of the things that becomes very, very difficult is you're 4 or 5 years into the operation of the building. You have to start replacing whether it's a chemical feeder, whether it's cardio equipment, whether it's weight equipment. So we go ahead and we do put a factor of capital improvement in there. So you begin to develop a sinking fund. So 5 years into the building, when all of a sudden you have a $250,000 expense, well, guess what? We have that allocated plus some. I put a real red squiggly line up there because I couldn't really come up with anything more creative this morning. There's factors that influence your cost recovery, okay? And any one of these can go ahead and can have an impact, both positive and or negative. So again, we've already talked about, but year 3 is going to be your first normal year. That's really when you're going to go ahead and figure out this is how many rentals we can do, this is how many programs we can do, this is how many high schools we can accommodate with lap swimming, all those different kinds of things. Membership rates and a scheduled review becomes really important. We've had a number of clients that have done fantastic in their first 3 to 5 to 6 years of operating their facility, and all of a sudden they go ahead and they start to see revenue numbers go down or membership goes ahead and wanes, but they've never increased their membership rates. So making sure that those are in some type of review process or scheduled increase is important. What you include in terms of services with your membership can have an impact on cost recovery. Level of programming in the building, level of rentals in the building. Your hours of operation can impact your cost recovery level. Your staffing levels can impact your cost recovery level. Right now, this operation plan we put together, it reflects about 96 hours of operation a week. So you're opening at 6 a.m. and closing at 9 p.m. On Saturdays, I think it was 7 to 8, and on Sundays it was 10 to 7. Something in that nature. Okay, you can shrink those, all right? You can expand those based upon demand. Right now, you have adequate staffing levels that I would consider industry standard, which means you have a manager available when the building is open and you have adequate supervision. Regardless, you have a 63,000 square foot building to go ahead and take into account. So again, we're trying to go ahead and provide you with as much of an eyes wide open approach to the operational plan as possible. The last slide, which should make everybody a little dizzy, just goes ahead, and we always get the question, well, what's a day in the life of this building look like? And I apologize that the numbers aren't better, but the highlighted in the green talks about ages 0 to 5. So are you going to see a bunch of 0 to 5 age kids at 6 a.m., 7 a.m.? No. They start coming in earlier in the morning with parents or guardians. You see few of them in the building around 11. It drops back down in the afternoon. You see that spike up again in the evening hours. Okay, same thing with the ages 6 to 18. You might see a little bit of that in the morning. It's pretty much flat, but by the time you hit 2 or 3 in the afternoon, especially if you're opening that up to swim teams, you're maxing out that age group's use and it drops off in the evening. 18 to 25-year-olds, you'll see some of those in the morning getting a workout before they go ahead and use the facility, maybe another little peak in midday. Then going ahead and seeing that jump up to the 10 level towards the end of the day. Ages 26 to 60 follows much as the same pattern before. And then 60 plus, your retirees, those who are maybe approaching retirement, you see their use is typically midday into the early afternoon. So again, I think the reason for this chart is that you're always going to try and keep your facility as busy as possible, but you're going to see your demographic throughout the day shift dramatically depending upon the programs that you're offering, the facilities that are included, and also the time of the year. That's a typical winter schedule. If it was a summer schedule, it would look completely different. So with that, before we get to conclusions, questions on operation?
Eric?
I think you covered the operations and maintenance pretty well. I'm just concerned about the larger ticket items as you get further into the age of the structure.
Sure.
I mean, we're always faced with things like replacing HVAC systems for public buildings, roof repairs, significant roof repairs, that kind of the bigger ticket items as they come up. You got to pay for those when they come. You don't really want surprises or whatever. They're pretty costly items, especially for a structure of this size. So I don't know, what would be the number you would throw out there as far as, okay, if you wanted to say, be able to be in a position to write a check when that cost comes due, what would you need to be set aside on an annual basis so that you're going to be prepared for those as they come up?
Sure. It's a great question. One of the things that we talked about earlier today is part of this process, or the next steps in the process, is actually going ahead and writing out a timeline in terms of age of roof, age of HVAC equipment, those kinds of things. That would go ahead and that would help you determine what that number that you needed to allocate was, or how you would factor that into your CIP program. For the numbers that I've given you tonight, we're factoring anywhere from $150,000 to $175,000 annually being allocated towards CIP, knowing that the first 3 to 5 years you're not going to use much of that and you're going to build a reserve. Is that going to be enough that you're going to be able to go ahead and replace an HVAC unit or replace a roof? No, it's not. You're going to have above and beyond that. But it goes ahead and begins the process of, if you had to refresh paint, if you had to replace furniture, if you needed to replace cardio equipment, weight equipment, it puts you in a position to be able to do that. So I'm not trying to avoid your question. I just don't know that I have the information at hand right now that I could give you an exact number that we need to allocate. There are some clients that we've worked with that say we want to be able to allocate enough dollars so that by the time, Chris would tell you, these facilities are designed for a 30 to 50 year lifespan. We have clients, the Salvation Army is one of them, that goes ahead and allocates enough dollars annually that 30 years from now they'll have been able to replace the entire building and the entire infrastructure. So some of it is dependent upon how the city approaches that and how you integrate that with your current processes.
Fair answer.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, and if I may, so we would, once the building gets built, we would have that schedule. And then that schedule would probably, if Caitlin still has that, Caitlin would get that schedule. It would be put into the city's system, the facility system, and then we would run it through that. So,
Jim.
so everything would be together.
This would be very similar to what we've done as far as major equipment replacement, like with fire.
Yes.
Fire and all that
Yes,
other,
sir.
it would be a very
Yes.
similar
It would-
type program.
Vehicles and facilities, yes, it would.
I get all that, but that costs money still. So that
No,
means
no,
we got to
it does.
allocate
I'm not-
additional money out of our annual budget to set aside for that, to cover that. So that may result in having to shift money around in the budgetary process now, or need more taxes to cover that particular amount too. I mean, it's not just invisible. It's there, and it's the elephant in the room as well. So when we do our budget hearings every year, there's going to be this amount we're going to have to allocate out for that, and that's going to be in addition to other expenses. So staff and health insurance and all the things we got to cover every year. So I just want to make sure we're taking into consideration all these other costs, because when we give a flat number of, X amount for X amount of a mill levy increase, it's not going to be that's not just it by itself. There's other things too that are going to be associated with this structure that are going to be additional costs that we're going to have to program for.
And that's what, and you're right, that would help with the scheduling that we get from Perkins Will.
Other questions? That was a good one. Thank you. Wait, that was, really? Okay.
We have plenty of concerns, but I think you presented the information
Wow.
well. I think it's a great
Wow.
study. So,
Okay.
I think you guys, as far as that goes, the information
Good
is
job,
great.
Chris. I'm going to run through conclusions real quick. Again, things that you've already heard, residents within the service area, the median income, the median age, the MPI, all go ahead and point to a very positive environment for a facility of this nature. Again, they're participating in a higher rate of participation, significantly higher than the national average. They've expressed interest in indoor recreation, including aquatics, fitness, gym activities, enrichment classes. Residents expressed majority support of a mill levy increase for the recreation center, 48% stating they vote in favor, 18% saying they might vote in favor. The site location, open space, and connectivity to the Clear Creek Trail is positive to most residents. As a footnote, and Chris doesn't know I'm going to do this, I would tell you that your park setting and your connectivity to your trail in your Valley of Champions is a huge asset to a facility of this nature. Just as communities become more bikeable, walkable, friendly, the connectivity to that trail and recognizing that and providing appropriate amenities is huge. The facility program represents about 63,500 square feet, would cost approximately $34.7 million. In the third year of operation, you're probably looking at a $2.2 million operating budget with about a $1.9 million revenue generation for a potential subsidy of somewhere in that $180,000 with a cost recovery of 92%. Again, 50,000 people, 60 to 70,000 square feet, 80 to 90% cost recovery. That's right where we see things. The addition of one of the lap pool options would better support the needs of the school district and swim teams, but with added costs in both construction and annual subsidy. As a former competitive swimmer, I'd love to see everybody have a big 8-lane, 50-meter pool, but you do have one of those being built right down the street. Another interesting side note for aquatics within Johnson County is because of the number of schools south of you that already have pools, they really determine what you can charge per hour. The national number that you would go ahead and see if you're looking at an average is somewhere in the $15 per hour per lap lane. There's middle schools and high schools within Johnson County that will rent you a 6-lane, 25-yard lap pool for $10 an hour. That's not $10 an hour per lane. That's $10 an hour for the full 6-lane, 25-yard pool. So the market that you're in as it relates to pool rental is very constrictive. Questions, comments? You guys have been very generous so far.
Yeah, I'll just jump in first and thank you guys. I think this was a fantastic presentation. I think it's been a wonderful process throughout the entire feasibility study, and community center is something certainly we've been talking about for the 5 years that I've been on council, and I know it's been twice as long that it has been in process. So I am thrilled to be here. It's the number one question, comment, concern I hear from residents out in Ward 3 is what's happening with the community center. So I am beyond thrilled. I think this programming looks great, and I'm excited to take the next step to let the voters weigh in. So I'll let everybody else come in. Eric?
I guess I'll lead off then. I have a number of concerns about it, so I need to voice those. I'm in Ward 2. I represent Ward 2. And Ward 2 is, when you showed your statistics up there, we didn't really dwell on them greatly by wards, but the family per capita, the family income for Ward 2 is about $53,000 a year. And you look at that and stack that up against the other wards, they're less than half of what we have in Ward 3 as far as what the median income is out there for a family. So obviously the burden on the folks in Ward 2 is going to be a lot more difficult to manage, especially when you start talking about disposable income. When you're dealing with $53,000, how much that's still disposable? And you got $107,000, perhaps a lot more of that is disposable income that you can kind of play with and do things with. You do entertainment and do fitness and all the other activities. So my folks are in kind of a jam on this thing. And also when you draw your service map there, your circle, Ward 2 is almost completely outside the circle, so my folks are kind of subsidizing everybody else. And Shawnee, go back and look at that circle. We're not in it. It stops around Flum.
I think Neil, do you want to respond to that?
The circle went, but it did go in. It wasn't a complete circle when it went to the east. It did capture all.
Well, you can if you say I'm going to go out in this jagged line and we're going to include Ward 2, but I mean it's not within your circle. If you make a circle,
that's a second. Okay.
So you got this disposable income disparity. So I'm speaking for my folks. Okay. I mean everybody's got their own representation of their own wards. We have heard from a couple of the health and fitness commercial operations here in the community, and they've expressed some alarm over it. I'll pass that on. Wonder about those new state laws that addressed raising of property taxes. How that's going to work with a mill levy increase at this time.
It's an election, so it doesn't relate.
We also were presented not too long ago with a proposal to build a large soccer complex out west. It was really nice, state-of-the-art kind of thing. What was it, 12, 14 fields or something like that, a pretty big operation. This would probably, if we spent the money on this, it's probably going to affect that. So I don't think you can do everything. Just throwing that out for everybody. To be fair, a community center like this is really an amenity. It's not a need. And you have to be honest about that. This is something, it's beautiful. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and tell you this wasn't a beautiful facility. It would make a lot of folks happy to come in and use this, but it isn't a need. And every year during the budget process, we look at needs and try to cover those needs. And we have the unmet needs that's presented to us by the city staff. We struggle to cover all those unmet needs as well. So this in there is an unmet need. And holy smokes, this is quite an unmet need you're putting on us here. And it's hard to even call it a need. So it's just something that'd be very nice to be a super amenity for Shawnee, obviously. The facility is, like we all have discussed, is not self-supporting. So every year you got to subsidize it. And then of course, I talked about the idea that we may have to set aside funds every year to get ready for those longer term, larger expenses you could face down the road. So all those concerns are pretty significant to me. I mean, for some people, and the people they represent, it's going to be less of a concern as depending on what ward you're in and so on. But my folks I've been out walking door to door for about the last 7 weeks, talking to people personally, and I'm coming up with comments like, I may have to sell my house because my property taxes are getting to the point where I don't know if I can afford to stay here anymore. There's a lot of elderly people in there. And so what's the breaking point? You know, where do we get into the situation where people can no longer afford to stay in their homes and we're causing that kind of problem for them? It's something that I'm having to grapple with. And, you know, much as I might like a community center, because it is gorgeous. I mean, it's beautiful and it's got a lot of neat stuff. But you got to be able to pay for it. We got to have the folks where they don't get hurt by it. I mean, the idea is make people happy with it, not to hurt folks with it. So those are some of the comments I have at this point in time.
Yeah, I would just quickly weigh in that I hate for us to get into this conversation where it's a one-to-one. So either we're looking at the community center, which would be, to be clear, a public vote. So folks would be making that decision. So it's not an either or. Either we fund parks, either we fund roads and streets and fire and safety and all that, or we fund a community center, because we are funding both. And we have been very responsible as a city to put aside money. We have a courthouse sales tax that's going to address public safety needs. We're spending more on our roads than we ever have before. I think we've been doing all those things. And I personally, and I know, and it's great if we have a difference of opinion on that, I don't view parks and recreation as an amenity. I think it is every bit as important as every other city service. It is a competitive advantage for us. It is something our residents expect. It's something they look for. I think that we should absolutely view it as just as important as all of the other elements. So I think it was Lindsay and then Mickey.
I'd like to start out by saying I agree with Stephanie on the fact that I think it's time for us to view parks and recreation as more than an amenity. I agree that it attracts businesses. It has an impact on public safety by giving children and families things to do. I did kind of want to, I guess, ask questions related to a couple of the things Eric said, just so that I understood. When we looked at the survey results, I know that you said in Ward 2, it seems as though folks aren't wanting the community center through your door knocking, but my understanding is that the survey that we just did that showed 60% support or would consider was across the entire city. So did we see, and maybe it was in there, did we see similar results in Ward 1, 2, 3, 4 as far as support?
We actually broke that down by ward. I don't
Okay.
know that chart was
Did
put
we
up.
get
So
them
if
by
at some
ward?
point we can certainly submit that to council and you guys can study that
I'd
and make
just
sure
be
that it's
curious
sort of
to
aligned.
see how it was across the wards.
Might be able to pull it over.
And then I know that you mentioned earlier scholarships being available for lower income families. I think when we talk about the mill levy increase, I noticed, for example, a $300,000 home, that's additional $14 a month. about half of that for a $150,000 home, and really not much at all for folks living in apartments. So that doesn't seem to me much of an additional expense. And if we could have some sort of a sliding scale or scholarship opportunities so that it is something that if a family wants to participate, they can participate. So I think that's really important. I want to make sure that for me, I think that's important to keep as a priority so that it's accessible to everybody.
I apologize, I was just going to comment that
Yeah.
that's not in the I couldn't find that in the presentation, but we will submit that.
No, it's
Just
not
to
in there.
see how it compares.
Yeah, I think the original version we got on Friday had it broken down by ward. No, it had the support broken down by ward as well.
Do you
Yeah.
recall?
Missing it all.
I don't know what Ward 2 was, but I know that they broke it out by ward because I know what mine was. So, yeah.
So with that, part of it is each ward had the same opportunity to answer, and so we had really good response, at least 100, from each ward that responded. So some wards obviously responded a little bit more than others, but each of them had that strong support. So it does break that down, which ones would support it, not support it. But it was interesting in some of those wards, and with the older population, they still saw the need. They just wanted more information. So again, I think they have more questions. So, but I will send those to you.
Lindsay, did you have anything else? Okay, all right. Mickey?
Over the last 14 years that I've been on here, I was around here when we purchased the property, and people were very interested in a center like this. That's the reason we purchased the property back at that period of time. And then, as was told, we did go through recessions. We went through quite a bit. I've been to door a lot, and that has been one of the major issues every time I go door to door. Is when are we going to get that center built? When are we going to get the inside facility built where we don't have to go to other cities to spend our money to do this? And, at some period of time, as I tell them, I said, it's still in the plan. It's going to have to be the public's decision anyway we look at it. And that, as I've heard Eric, I've heard others, we're not we're not taking away from something else for it. This will be an election that will go to the people to make the decision. If I remember rightly, it was fairly even around in all four wards. On the amount or the volume of yes and no's or maybes or whatever. So if the majority of the city wants to vote in a tax to build something like that, I don't believe it's my position to tell the majority, no, you can't have it because there's a certain amount of people that don't want it or don't feel that they can afford it. It's up to the people, and then everybody else will just have to deal with it. I mean, we're in a democracy here, and I don't believe it's my decision to spend between $35 million and $40 million. That should be the decision of the people. If that's what they want to do, we need to go with what they want. That's the way I feel about it.
Jim?
Mickey says, I think, first of all, one of the things tonight was to get the presentation, get it in front of the public. There are many, many more. There's a lot of water to go under the bridge before we get to the point to making that decision. I go back to Parks, Pipes, and Pavement, which was in 2014, and again, the council voted to put that and let the people decide. The people decided by basically 2-1 that that's what they wanted to do, to impose the sales tax. That was fine. But the thing I'm going here, we got program options, partnership opportunity with 232, continuation relationship with the design team, construction method and development, and public input through the ballot question. I would like to go ahead and address these things. I think many of these other questions are going to come as our discussions go forward. We will get the answers to all of these. Obviously, we're not going to have them all tonight. There's far too much material to go over, but.
Okay. I agree with you. Any other comments from the council before we open it up to the public? Okay. Is there anyone from the public who would like to speak to this item? Okay, well, seeing none, we are back to council conversation. So I think if it works best for everyone, maybe we just go down this list and kind of assess where we want to be. Neil, does that work for you?
Yes,
that-
yes,
okay.
thank you.
Great, yep. So program options, how are we feeling? I guess this is probably most in reference to adding the lap pools, and if so, 6 or 8. So throw it out there. I will say it's, 53% of folks who were surveyed said that they wanted a lap pool, so I would be in favor. I think if we're doing it, we're building the community center, I think it's worthwhile to consider that lap lane at some level as a part of that as well, particularly with DeSoto being interested in it. So I would personally like to see that move forward. Yeah, Lindsay. Yeah.
I agree that if 53% said they want a lap pool, we should be continuing forward on that. I do think it would be helpful to get the information on what the mill increase would be.
I agree.
Before
Yep.
we go too far down that road.
And what the school says.
Yes.
That too,
Yeah, so
yes.
that kind of dovetails with the second bullet too. You're working ahead. So it sounds like we are all good. Do you need parameters on whether 6 or 8, or is this kind of good enough to make the next?
We can, because it does depend on the talks
Hmm.
with the school district, and yes, so it does. And then again, we will be coming back to you a lot this year, or the rest of this year.
Sure.
With moving this forward, or however you'd like to proceed, so, okay.
Okay, so sounds like moving forward with lap lane. Sounds like we all are interested in continuing the conversations about a possible partnership with DeSoto School District and the other parochial schools as well. Yes, okay, check. The continuation of the relationship with the design team. So I'll just kick off again. I think they've done a fantastic job, and I would love to continue that partnership. So.
Continue.
Okay, guys are easy tonight. So construction method and development of the RFQ. This was something we went over on Friday regarding design build, or construction management or risk. As I said on Friday, kind of landed with CMR as probably the best option for us moving forward with our designer of choice, and then allowing us to have a contractor who can partner up. Okay, CMR it is. And then public input through a ballot question. So I think this is probably mostly about timing. We had discussed previously November versus the spring. It doesn't sound like now. I mean, we have so many kind of open boxes, unanswered questions. I don't know that it's feasible really to get anything by November or even really hire a CMR. So spring, yeah.
April.
So that would be a mail. I guess we could discuss mail ballot or in person if anyone has any preference.
Mail in.
Why don't we cross that bridge down the road?
Yeah. So, yeah, if anyone had any strong preferences, but it sounds like spring, one way or another, is what we're looking at. Okay. All right. Anything else you guys need from us for further direction?
No.
Okay. Great.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Thank all of you guys. This is great.
Thank you. That was good.
Okay.
Very good.
The second item tonight is to discuss policy statement number 7, PS7, conduct of public meetings regarding remote participation by members of the governing body. On May 29th, 2018, the governing body approved revisions to policy statement number 7, conduct of public meetings, to allow members of the governing body to participate in meetings remotely. Mayor Dissler expressed concern about the new policy, and on June 25th, 2018, the governing body temporarily suspended the revisions to allow for further discussion at future council committee. Action is required at a future council meeting if the committee recommends changes, or if the committee recommends the policy as approved earlier. Do we have a formal presentation for this, or should we just kind of go through the mayor's comments on 7? Yeah, I thought that might be the easiest way if we pull that up and we can go through kind of the notes that she made. Looks like it starts. It looks like page 7. So her first comment we have currently written in the amended version: council members may remotely participate in a maximum of 2 meetings, city council or council committee per year. There's no limit to the number of times a council member can participate remotely in a special call meeting. Her question was clarified: 2 city council and 2 council committee, or 2 total. Her opinion was should be 2 total, not 4. So thoughts on that? Lindsay. Yeah.
I think 2 seems sufficient. 4 seems like too many to me.
I agree. All right.
I think 2
Limited to
total
2
meetings
total.
in a year. Otherwise, it gets to be too much.
And it should be, if you have a special meeting, we need to include it for the entire meeting, even with the
That's further in. Yep.
executive session in the back, everything, not to use two of them up on one day.
Right. Jim.
Doesn't it say somewhere in the council handbook about need to strive not to miss more than 2 meetings a year?
I think that's probably the general opinion of the voters. Yeah.
I'm good with the 2.
Sounds like we're good with 2 total. Okay. Let's see. Next question comment is remote participants must be fully present for the entire meeting. That is open to the public. She said, what happens if not? Technology issues, et cetera, et cetera. Right.
How many times do we retry to, reconnect?
So that, yeah,
And
we've
I know
got-
that's a little bit further, but I mean,
Yeah, that's,
It doesn't specifically say how many times. It just says that we'll try to reconnect and that the chair of the meeting can disconnect the call if it's a disruption.
Yeah.
Right.
okay.
so it sounds like we're okay maybe leaving it.
If we were in a meeting like we are right now, and somebody had to excuse themselves and leave because of medical
Whatever,
issue
yeah.
or God knows what, and they had to get out, the vote they just made a few minutes ago is still valid.
Right.
I mean, it's a-
Yeah. So it sounds like we're good leaving that as is without the additional edit. Okay. So 5 is remote participants may participate in executive sessions. The mayor is of the opinion that we should not do that. I do think that it is worthwhile. She does add, if the council decides to proceed for this allowance, I believe we should add language. You guys can see it. Statement of assurance that they're alone. It could be a good kind of, cover ourselves to just have a statement at the beginning, just so it's liability on that folk for being a bad actor. Yeah.
We also need to remember the future. This is going to be not set in stone per se, but we don't know who's going to be voted in the future.
Right.
I could say I'm by myself and there's 100 people in the room. So how are we going to make sure that no one else was there?
Yeah, I think the idea is just at the beginning to have some sort of statement of liability, and I'm not an attorney, so, by joining this meeting remotely, you affirm that you are by yourself and all liability of anything you do outside of that is on you and not the city, blah, blah, blah.
Sort of like an honor code.
Yeah.
But I think that means a lot. If you're going to sit here and say to your fellow councilman that, hey, I am alone, I can certify I'm alone right now, that's pretty darn good. If the guy lies, it's going to come back on him at some point, and that's not going to be good. So you don't want to be caught in that situation.
Yeah, and we don't want the city to have liability. Oh, good, the attorney, great. I thought you were coming up. Oh. I thought you were going to weigh in on our language.
When I did my survey back in April, there were a few smaller cities that I didn't include in the presentation, like out in western Kansas, that do require their council person to make some statement that they are alone if they're going to participate in executive session.
I think that makes sense, yeah. Okay, so we will add that. Moving on to,
Just
yeah,
On that, I think we all agree with that. I just wondered about one little wrinkle to it possibly. Say you're at home and your wife's in the room or something like that. I mean, I think if you make a declaration.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't have one of the developer's henchmen in the room with me or something like that, I mean, my wife is here, she's running around in the kitchen with her, so she may hear some of the stuff. But I mean, just a disclosure, basically, disclosing.
yeah. I would say unless it gets dicey during executive session, I don't think you would want anyone in the room with you
No.
necessarily.
Not
Yeah.
an executive session. There. But anybody's welcome to these meetings, these are open meetings, so.
Right, but we're talking about if we go into
Executive
executive
session.
session affirming that you're alone.
And that would be important for, yeah, that's
Yeah.
right, executive session, sorry about
Yeah,
that.
no, you're fine. That's a good thought. Yeah. Okay, so technology, second bullet, the city will make reasonable accommodations to provide remote participants with copies of materials. What if the accommodations cannot be made? Do they participate without information? Jim?
All of these meetings is published 72 hours before. I think it's incumbent on you, if you're going to do it, it's incumbent on the person, just like certifying that you're going to be alone, certifying you to have access to the material somehow.
Yeah, I don't know if this would
Not
also,
necessarily, though.
right, or if there's like a PowerPoint, we don't always get those in our packets, for example.
the PowerPoint in advance?
If we're going to be gone.
This is a sticky one here.
Yeah. I don't know. Okay.
Usually our intent is that there's something in the PowerPoint that's not in written form in the memo or in the packet, so it's usually just kind of a summary, kind of hitting the highlights. Usually our general intent for that, but we could get the presentations emailed over.
The biggest issue would be the executive sessions.
Yeah.
Where you
Yeah.
would be looking at the information everybody in the room's got. Unless there's another way of addressing that.
Yeah. I mean, if it's a handout in executive session, you could almost just take a picture of it and text it to the person. Yeah.
That could be done.
So it sounds like we're okay with the language as is, just assuming that this city will try to email whatever they need. Okay. To D2, council members who intend to participate remotely must provide 24 hours notice to the meeting chair, city manager, designee. Some special call meetings have less than an hour notice. What happens then? Not allowed to participate. I mean, I think that seems like an extenuating circumstance.
Said the key words at their request. They're going to miss the meeting, so they're asking to be put in their request. If you're attending a meeting at the city's request, like an executive session or whatever, that's one thing. But if hey, I'm going to be on vacation, but I still want to be in this meeting because it's some important stuff I wanted to vote on, and you wanted to be wired in, that'd be at your request, basically. I think it's a
So you think it's-
significant
yeah.
difference.
Yeah. So it sounds like we're good with edited language. Okay. Let's see, the final, in the event of technical difficulties lasting longer than 5 minutes, the meeting chair should suspend discussion until the remote participant is again present. If the delay lasts longer than 5 minutes or interferes with the meeting chair may excuse the remote participant and continue the meeting. Her comments are, I feel this is disruptive, not only to the meeting chair, but to other council members and the audience. How many times would this be allowed if they drop more than once during a meeting?
I think it's the chair's decision and it's common sense. If they drop twice, then there's a problem. No, it's.
At the discretion of the chair. And then I don't know that I need to read, she has some general statements, so I can just read this for the record. So from the mayor, since the previous discussion, a few residents have reached out to me not in support of this. They have made a few different points. One, they have an expectation of their representatives to be present. Two, this is not allowed on the state or federal level because there's no way to prove who was present on the remote side. And three, political issues and ramifications if someone claims they were dropped intentionally so they would not be allowed to vote, etc. I struggle with this because I completely understand, respect, and appreciate the desire to want to be able to participate remotely and believe it says a lot that our council wants to attend all meetings, but at the same time, I also foresee the frustration and risk that can come with it. At this time, I feel the risk outweighs the convenience. So that noted, those were the only changes she had in the document. So does anyone have any additional thoughts, changes? Are we good with those few modifications?
Yes.
Okay. Is there anyone from the public who would like to speak on this item? Yeah, come on up, sir, if you will state your name and address for the record.
Good evening, Neil Sawyer, 11908 West 69th. I too have sat up there for 13 years, and I'm not sure I understand why we're even at this point. If you're in the state legislature, you're there to vote. If you're not, you don't. Same way with the feds. I think there's a little more to it than just allowing somebody to get online and vote. I would think there's a lot more to it, because then shouldn't you post their vote before anybody else votes? How do you know what's going to happen? And maybe it's a minute point, but hey, if you're gonna have somebody absentee and they're gonna vote, that vote ought to be right up there. Instead of, if you have a 3-3 tie, you got 2 out, and then the mayor has to say, well, it passed, the 2 missing voted yes. Do we really need, I mean, I just am having difficulty with it. I campaigned, 6 or 7 different times. I told the public that, hey, I'm going to be there to represent them. I knew how many times a month that I was going to have to devote to it. Did I make every one of them? Probably over 13 years, I probably missed 6 or 7. And that's, some people have to miss more than that. But I just struggle with why we're even having this discussion. So that's my short view of the world, and I have never been up here since I wasn't here any longer, but I had to voice my opinion on that. And I thank you for your time.
Neil, I would point out that their votes will be available, so the idea is that it will simply be a call-in. So whoever, if I'm gone, I'm going to be voting at the same time as everyone else. So you're going to hear my vote at the same time as everyone else. It's not that the chair's waiting.
That's what I'm getting at. Will that vote be so the public can hear it?
Yeah, it's going to be on the system.
I would assume it's in the same order as we would vote
And so
normally.
it's just going to be on the audio system, so everyone should be able to hear it.
Everybody knows how
Yeah.
I feel about it. I think we're wasting some valuable time dealing with something else. I
Thank you.
appreciate your time.
Is there anyone else who would like to speak to this item? Okay, seeing none, I will accept a motion.
What, to move this to the council?
Yes, with the, I guess we made a couple of changes.
Okay, I move that we move this item forward to the council with the noted changes.
Okay, a motion has been made. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The motion passes. Okay, that concludes our agenda for this evening. I will,
To adjourn.
okay. I have a motion to adjourn. Do I have a second?
Second.
All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, nay. Motion passes. We are adjourned.